Hello, hello, and welcome to our Fall for Watercolor art class. Hi, I'm so excited to see you today. We are going to be painting a very cute little pumpkin and talking about water barriers. Wake up, Kate. So if you don't know me, hi, I'm Kate. I'm a watercolor artist, and my goal is to make watercolor feel accessible, doable, and fun. We usually do those through watercolor kits that have everything you need, but today and this whole month, we are doing a Fall for Watercolor challenge where there's a daily painting every day that you're encouraged to try. You can do them all in 3 minutes. But if you want to make it your own, you can too. All the details are in the challenge link below. But we're also doing live watercolor classes, which is so fun. So again, today we are going over the watercolor concept of the water barrier. And I will just stand on this hill, die on this hill, whatever the expression is. Water is the most critical part of watercolor. Who would think? It's in the name, right? But I think it's overlooked often. And so we're going to really dig into what the water barrier means, how we can make it work for us, how much is too much, how little is too little. And we're just going to get into it and make a cute little pumpkin. I want to take a moment and just apologize for any rhinoceroses you hear stampeding through the background. My kiddos are right above us, and though they've been encouraged to be quiet, they are 2 and 4. So we'll give them a little grace there. And if you are streaming in onto the live, why don't you pop in the comments and let me know your favorite color. So Tracy is loving all things orange. Jessica is here. And yeah, all right, shall we get into it? So I'm going to switch over to my little overhead situation. And I'm also going to just quickly add a new angle so that you can see a side view as well. There we go. Oop, might help if I turn the camera on. Okay, so while that's initiating, okay, let's do, so we'll have a little side by side, but we're going to start right here at the top. Okay, so today we're talking about water barriers. This basically describes the effect that water has when applied to the watercolor paper. So when water is applied to good watercolor paper, it will hold on top of the page for a while before the paint dries. So you will see the difference between, imagine you're using construction paper and you put a little dot of, color on your construction paper. What is it going to do? It's going to sink right into the paper, right? But if you're using watercolor paper, you should see the water develop almost like a little tiny bubble or dome on top of the paper. And you can really load this up. You can make like a whole water droplet. And to me, that's what I'm looking for in watercolor paper, is a good ability to hold the water. So let's switch over to our other camera. I can kind of show you what I'm talking about. So here, I'm just going to be creating this little bubble. Let's see if you can zoom in on that cutie. All right, let's move this. Ooh, oops. Let's see if that'll focus. Come on, right here, right here. There we go. There's that autofocus. Okay, so we are going to be adding to this little bubble. See how it really can pile up? I mean, it's quite buoyant there. This is going to be too much water to paint with, because if you watch, just look, see, the water is going to kind of, you see how it's like living inside the bubble? Come on, focus, focus, focus. All right. The paint just kind of swims around in the bubble if there's too much water. So how much water we're using in these water barriers is really critical. So let's go ahead and look above. We're going to do our little exercise. So if you haven't already, go ahead and wet your paints. I'm using my little spray bottle right here. And I'm wetting some orange, some reds and yellows, and some greens today. Maybe a little blue. So I guess basically just all the colors, right? And I'm gonna mix up, I have this nice kind of burnt orange color, and of course the name is going to elude me at this moment in time. I don't know. I can't remember what it is. I think it's burnt sienna. So I'm gonna grab some of that and I'm gonna mix up some yellow. We're just gonna mix up a couple different colors here on our palette so that we can play around with this wet and wet technique in our exercise. All right, so let's do a little bit of this red too. So let's take a look at this water barrier. So I'm gonna take my yellow. We're just gonna make a nice circle, okay? You can do any shape you want, but it's your, yeah, there's no but. You do any shape you want, whatever's relaxing to you. So here I have a circle. So anywhere within this circle, the water is going to stay. So I can add in a big thing of red, and it's all going to stay within the circle. All right. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday when we were talking about washes. So you can do another circle over here. And as long as they don't touch, those areas will hold their water barrier. Okay. But let's say we just decide to go a little bit closer and just have these kiss. You'll see, do you see how it connected there? So let's just keep painting circles. And from these circles, we're just going to have them kiss. Okay. Mwah, and see what happens. See what happens when you connect them at the beginning. See what happens when you connect them at the end. See how the water ebbs and flows. And as long as that water is wet within the water barrier, you're going to have that interaction, that wet on wet, that spreading and cascading. Okay, so somebody is asking, Jennifer's asking, here, let's see if I can. When wetting your paints before painting, does wetting your paint with 2 or 3 big drops from an eyedropper add too much water to the paint? No, that's a great option. I actually really like doing that because it's a little tidier. When you do a spray bottle, water gets all over your palette. And today I'm fine with that, but some days when I'm doing a little bit more specific color work, I won't want all my paints activated. So an eyedropper is a really great solution. Thanks for asking, Jennifer. Okay. And today I asked y'all what your favorite colors were. We've got some purple, we've got some teal. If you are tuning in right now, make sure you let me know in the comments what your favorite color is so I can track your entry. So let's do another one right here. And what I love to do is do it right at the last minute and then let that paint cascade in. A little smooch. Okay, now this one is starting to get a little bit drier, so I'm going to see what happens over here. I think it's going to be too dry to have too much of an effect. Okay, so let's take a look. Yep, see how when I go over, there's none of that mixing and blending. Here, let's zoom in. Do you see how you can see the faint layer here of the color underneath? That shows that the red was too dry to have any of this commingling. Oop. All right, pink is Katie's favorite color. Awesome. Okay, from Katie, Texas. Very cool. Very cool. Okay, so as we're doing our water barriers, hopefully you've played around with this a little bit while you're working on your little circles. I'm going to talk about why this is important. So water barriers are really helpful to be aware of when you are painting watercolor. First of all, it's important to know how they work. So if you have a really, really wet circle, so let's say we have like a really juicy paint puddle circle. I don't know if you can tell, but there's a lot of water swirling in this circle. If I am to add a drier circle next to it, so, there's a little bit of paint, but it's not as much. I'm not going to have them touch just yet, but let's take a moment to predict. What do you think is going to happen when these two connect? Any guesses? Periwinkle is a favorite color. Okay, let's see if your predictions are correct. All right, the blue is going to come into the yellow because there's more moisture in the blue than in the yellow. So that water, its goal is to disperse evenly. So think about like if you had a bath towel and it got into the tub a little bit, the water is going to soak up into that towel because the towel is dry, and so that water is trying to evenly disperse. Imagine this is our dry towel, and this is the bathtub. So that bathtub is seeping up into our towel here. The other thing that is important to know is if it's got too little water. So that's kind of if there's too much water, it's going to go into the other one, which sometimes is okay, right? Sometimes that's the goal. But if there's too little water, then we're not going to see that movement. So let's try to make a shape here, and we're just going to do a little bit of water. So more pigment, but kind of dry. Okay, it's even a little bit too damp for me. Let's say we're trying to create this beautiful cascading bloom. I'm going to do this yellow here. And yes, there is some color spilling over, but it is not as dramatic as this one over here. So if you're trying to create a certain effect, the amount of water you have makes a difference. Okay, so now I'm going to paint two circles, and we're going to talk about when you connect the circles and the shapes of the water barrier. Okay, so this is a really powerful color. This is a green gold. It's like, it just wants to get into every other color. It's like your nosy neighbor. It just wants to get in there and spread all the news of its color around. Okay, so let's take a moment I'm going to do it with this pink. So I'm going to do two shapes. First, I'm going to wait until the very last second to have these connect, okay? Okay, so I've made my little circle, and then I've connected it at the last second. So there's very little commingling here. But what if I started over here? Next to it. If I start my circle already touching, the influx of all that paint that was on my brush is going to push in to that green. So thinking about creating these blooms or these connections between the water barriers is really fun to control, try to control. Can you tell I'm like super type A? How can we control the water? But it's super fun to kind of make predictions and see what's going to happen. So if you haven't already, I highly encourage you trying this little exercise of all the circles and try to predict which way the water is going to flow as you load it onto your brush. You can even do like a study chart if you're really into this. You can say, this one, the green had more water, or the blue had more water, whatever. Another interesting thing is that different paints are going to have different spreading capabilities. The different paints are going to have different like movement. So this is New Gamboge. Once again, this is our nosy neighbor. It wants to get into everything. And let's do our yellow ochre, which is, I feel, a little more sedentary. And this just has to do with like the pigments that the paint is made out of. Okay, so we have our yellow ochre down here. We have our new gamboge. Ooh, permanent rose from Winsor & Newton is Analia's favorite color. I totally agree. Lisa has periwinkle. All right, I'm just checking to see if we've got any other comments that I missed. Awesome. So as we're looking at these two colors, let's mix them with this pink and see what happens. So this one is going to flow together. These ones want to move. These ones want to connect and smooch. Then if we go here with the yellow ochre, we're not seeing as much of a connection. Can you see that? And it might have to do with how wet or how dry some of them are, but it will be interesting to play with your paints and see which ones travel the most. Another way to experiment with this, I know we're just kind of playing around here, but another way to experiment with this is to just do water and then drop some of your paint in and see how it spreads in that water. That little dot will not go beyond that water barrier that you've created. Okay, so we've talked about how to purposefully do water barriers and how to create those blooms, but what if you don't want to create a bloom? Why is this important? So some people will use the technique called loose watercolor painting. So this is usually what folks think of when they think of watercolor. It's those big loose florals. They're usually made with one layer of paint, maybe some details added at the top, but you're creating all of that paint together. So if you don't want any of these blooms to happen, you have to come up with another solution. So the solution for that would be to leave a line. And we did this a little bit yesterday. But let's say we're making a carrot. We'll do it with our pumpkin for realsies, but let's say we're making a carrot, okay? So I've got my little carrot shape. And I really, maybe like a little rounded there. I really don't want the green of my carrot to connect here. So I'm just going to leave a little gap between, this is like the fanciest carrot I've ever seen. I'm just going to leave a little gap here between the carrot and where the greenery comes in. As you can imagine, if you accidentally have it kiss, whoop, then you've got some green in your carrot. So sometimes that's the effect you want, but sometimes you don't want that color to coexist. So that's one way to do it. Same thing with flowers. So if I'm going to do something like this, maybe I'm creating like a little flower situation. And let's say I want to do some purple in these outer layers. I'm just going to leave a little bit of room. But sometimes it can be really beautiful to let the purple flow in. So maybe I'll introduce it to that barrier. But you can see how this one's separate. So those are just some of the ways in which we can use water barriers to our advantage, whether we permeate that barrier or leave it alone. So we're going to do both of those things as we paint our pumpkin. And I just want to let you guys know, like, if you are trying to create a water barrier and your pen bumps or you've had too much coffee, that is totally, totally, totally okay. Like, not a big deal at all, because it creates like this beautiful cascading effect. So look at this cute little carrot. Ah! Oh my gosh. Like, is that what we intended? No. But is it beautiful? Yes. And that is what brings the whimsy into the watercolor. And we are here for the whimsy. Okay, so let's push this aside. And I have a little outline of my pumpkin here. I'm going to take a quick sip of coffee. As I'm taking a quick little moment of coffee, why don't you tell me in the comments, have you painted before? Where are you in your watercolor journey? Do you prefer like a loose style or a specific style, or do you have a preference yet? Maybe you don't know. So let me know kind of what's going on with your watercolor if you're feeling brave. Okay. So for this, yesterday we talked about creating washes, and we want to use the right size brush to match the coverage that we are trying to achieve. So today I am using my size 5 round Princeton brush. This is their Real Value brush. It comes in a set that actually comes with all of our watercolor kits. So if you are loving these tutorials, don't forget we sell watercolor kits with everything you need to start painting. It comes with brushes, paper, paints, and video tutorials. So more of this lovely stuff. So we've got a good sized brush. We're not going to cover the whole shape of the pumpkin. Instead, this time we are going to create the shape of the pumpkin using water barriers. So creating these little gaps. So think about a pumpkin. It has these almost little crescent moon shapes. So we're going to create that with our water barriers. All right, mixing up my orange. I have an orange here. I think it's like cadmium orange. I'm not feeling it today. So I've got a little bit of my yellow ochre. I've got some nice new gamboge, which I love it. We've got, I think I added in some of this burnt sienna and maybe a little bit of this red color. I can't quite remember. I think I'm going to add some magenta just to kind of give it that brassy pumpkin vibes. And what I'm going to do is I am going to paint my little crescent. So I'm going to start on the left. If you're right-handed, you can do that too. If you're left-handed, start on the right. You can also, somebody said to me the other day, they were like, oh, I can move my paper. Yes, you can. You can totally move your paper. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating that crescent shape, and then we're going to leave a little gap in between all of these crescents. Now, the tricky thing is we want to make sure it's really juicy because we're going to want to play around with this for a little bit once we have all our crescents in. So as you're painting, make sure you're picking up a lot of color, a lot of water. You may want to prepare some extra in your paint puddle. And if you feel like it's starting to look a little dry, you can always add a little drop of water in there. Okay, so now here's the tricky part, okay? We are gonna go in to the pumpkin and we're gonna create this little line here to give us that divot. So as you move your brush, you can start further away and then kind of bring it closer, but just make sure there's a little edge that shows that ridge of the pumpkin, okay? So as always, we're making sure this is nice and juicy. We've got lots of time to play around with this. I'm creating my crescent. And if your crescents touch, what is that? That's okay. It's no biggie. We're creating art, and art has individuality. We're painting nature, and no nature looks the same. So we are good. It's creative interpretation, right? All right, so we have some folks, a loose and a detail and a bit past beginner for Jessica. We have some folks who started, let's see, Melinda started her watercolor journey in March. It's been such a new fun craft. She's added to her hobbies. She'd say she's more loose in her paintings. Watercolor has brought me out of my comfort zone because I've always said I'm not an artist. Well, I am. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm going to just pin this one because that makes me so happy. Look at that. I love that. You are an artist. We all can be artists. I think there's a really big barrier, water barrier or like life barrier between people feeling like they can be artists. And as soon as you pick up that paintbrush or whatever your medium is and put it to your canvas, whatever that may be, you are an artist. Like, if you're creating, you are an artist. Okay. I love that. Thank you for sharing. And we have Lisa here, started watercolor painting before COVID. This year I've stepped out of the classroom to try other things in my professional life. It's given me all the time to try all things watercolor. Oh, Lisa, I'm so excited for you. That's so fun. So sounds like a former teacher, maybe. Trying watercolor. So here you can see the perils of doing covering a big area and not mixing up enough paint. I'm kind of running low on some of my color here. So I've mixed some new. It doesn't quite match, and I'm totally okay with that. Like this little pumpkin is still gonna be cute. And I'm just getting crazy with the colors because why not? 25 years in the classroom. Oh my goodness. Congratulations. That's a big transition. I was a middle school English teacher and then middle school librarian before I started my painting biz. So we love a teacher here. I love a teacher. All right. So you can see we're making our way around the crescent. Some of it looks a little different than it did at the beginning. I'm okay with that. I'm trying to keep it really nice and wet at the bottom. At the top, some of it is wet, but because I was reading those comments, honestly, they dried a little bit. Multitasking, it's not a real thing, right? That's what they say. You just do a couple things poorly instead of one thing well, right? Okay, so we're working on our pumpkin. I've got one more little crescent here, and I'm keeping the bottom pretty wet because I'm gonna do like a little line of dirt, and I want that to reflect in our pumpkin. It's a dirty little pumpkin. It's here in the PNW. It's been raining. It's been sitting in the patch, just waiting for somebody to come get it. But it needs a little TLC. All right, let's see here. So I'm adding just a little triangle in the back. Okay, so now let's mix up some brown. I'm gonna do that by doing my burnt orange and then maybe like a little bit of green here to get like a nice brown. I think I want a little bit of yellow. Okay, I want it a little bit darker, so I'm adding some blue. I think that's nice. I think that's going to look really nice with our painting. So here, this is where we're going to have the colors kiss. Okay, so I'm just doing like a little dirt. Kind of wiggling my brush around, giving it that dirty little texture. Give it a dirty little texture. And you can see some of the color is seeping from the pumpkin into the dirt, vice versa. Okay, I love that. This is a technique called scumbling, so we'll get into that soon. All right, now I'm going to take that brown and I am going to go ahead and do my stem. So being careful not to touch the parts that I've painted. Of course, I already did. That's okay. All right, so we've got our little stem. Nalia started playing with watercolor in May, and I found that painting pre-drawn designs is far easier for me. Oh, awesome. Well, if you don't know, folks, all the watercolor kits that we make come with pre-drawn designs. So if you are feeling the same way as Nalia, I got you, boo-boo. Okay, so here we have our pumpkin. If we are wanting to create a little bit more shadow in here, you can always, while these are still wet, you can always drop in some like darker color into the bottoms. Maybe we want a little bit more orange over here. Maybe we want a little bit of that. Okay, so you see how this is dry? This paint isn't going into the water barrier, okay? That ship has sailed. This one though was still wet, so it went right in. And if I haven't given you my little tip yet on how to know if watercolor is wet or dry, first of all, if it looks shiny, I don't know if you can see here, you see how this one's really wet. That's still shiny. That's still wet. If you can't tell, if it's not shiny, you can hover your finger over the top. And if it's cool, like if you feel like a little whisper of a fairy, that means it's still wet. That's the water evaporating from the page. Right now I'm mixing up a little green here We're going to do some little leafy situation for our pumpkin. And then if you're still not sure, you can just touch your painting. And if it's wet, it will feel cool. And if it's dry, it won't. So you definitely want to make sure that you start familiarizing yourself on when your paper is wet or not. And this will come with time. The more you do it, the more you'll know. If you change paper supplies, those answers will change. So right here, I'm just kind of making little leaf shapes by just wiggling my brush. Honestly, this is a loose watercolor painting. We're not trying for realism here. We just want a little extra pizzazz. The cool thing with these water barriers here is if you wanted to do your stem a different color, I don't know what's going on here. Like here, let's kind of make the stem here a little bit brown. That brown will cascade into the bottom of the leaf to give it a little dimension. All right. Okay. I don't know what's going on here, but that's okay. You know, these pumpkin leaves are pretty wild. Might make some a little bigger. Maybe we'll do some curly cues. I'm just kind of having fun here as the paint is going into everywhere. Oh, that's okay, Anna. The replays will be, Anna said she's late. No worries. The replays will be available on YouTube. And I'm not sure if they were on Facebook or not. All right. And then maybe we'll do like a nice big leaf that's kind of coming into the foreground there. Maybe some like, I don't know. It's like some crazy leaves. They're probably even a little small. This must be a really, really big pumpkin. And I'm okay with that. Okay. So here we have played around with the water barriers. We started out by talking about what a water barrier is, why it's important, how we can make it move and groove to our advantage in our paintings. We talked about ways in which, hi Elle, we talked about ways in which we can use the water barrier and how it affects our paintings, whether we leave a gap to keep the colors separate or whether we close that gap to allow the blooms. We also talked about how you can use it in a flower and how it applies more to loose watercolor. And then we painted our pumpkin and we created the pumpkin shape by leaving these lines to give us our pumpkin. What is that? Pumpkin shape, I guess. And we added some dirt and let that permeate our water barrier. And then we kept the greens separate to really show off those leaves. So if you have any questions about water barriers, go ahead and ask them in the comments. Tomorrow, we are going to be doing an exercise on wet and wet. And this was actually a little preview because we're going to be doing carrots and really leaning in to mixing those water barriers and letting them play together. We are also still doing our daily painting. So if you'd like to get more entries, I've collected all of you all who are here in the live. If you're watching this at home, just make sure you tag me in your final product so that I can make sure I enter you into the giveaway. If you haven't signed up for the challenge yet, check out the link in the description below. And today's daily painting is an oak leaf. So I will be hopping on TikTok at some point doing a live of me painting that oak leaf. The day is chaotic, but we are going to get our daily painting in. So thank you so much for joining. It was so great to paint with you. As always, have a wonderful day and happy painting, my friends. All right, bye.